Last year I came face to face with the sobering but perhaps expected experience of purchasing for $20 the first hardcover volume of Baccano, the light novel, reading a couple of chapters and quickly realizing that it just probably wasn't worth it. Having been slow to get subbed during its airing in, I believe, summer of 2007, Baccano wasn't really talked about all that much until it eventually got brought over to the US by Funimation. I think I finally finished the show in early 2008, was pretty into it, and grew increasingly more so as time went on, and I began to have more and more of a taste for these sort of violent, schlocky, fun, character-driven shows. As I mentioned on a previous podcast, at this time, I was not very into plot-driven stuff. I was way more into characters and their chemistry. So my favorite action vehicles were ones that had a strong ensemble cast, such as Baccano and Black Lagoon and other series like that. Characters with very strong aesthetic personas, to use a term that I coined years ago, and hopefully is self-evident in its meaning. And of course, Baccano was a show that seemed like it was promising another season, because we had a 12-episode show which would have been an open and shut case, just adapting the first 3 of the light novels. It twists them up into one coherent story in a similar fashion to how Haruhi did so. Actually, it might have even been 4 books. In any case, it ties all of these stories nicely together, has all of their climaxes occur all at once in the final episode. It's really badass. But the reason it seemed like there'd be another season is because they then followed it up with a 3-episode TV special. I think it may have been an OVA, I'm not sure. Came out sometime later, and most of it seemed to be set up for future installments. Like, there is a narrative to this 3-episode arc, but it's pretty, honestly, not all that interesting. A lot of people really didn't like this arc because of the fact that, for a lot of people, this was just the last 3 episodes of the show, because I believe it was just packaged on the US DVDs as just, the last 3 episodes, which is kind of a weird way of looking at it, because the first 13, I just remembered it was 13, was so tightly wound and so perfectly paced that to then just have these 3 that feel like a hanger-on at the very end is really awkward. So I don't blame people who hate those 3 episodes, but if you saw it at the time, it seemed less like the last 3 episodes of the show and more like a teaser for an upcoming new season. But it never came. A few years later, the original author's later work, Do-Da-Da-Da, would get adapted by the same studio, same director, same writer, same general tone. It would go for 24 episodes, and in a very, very similar way, it would have an OVA about a year later that almost entirely existed to set up stuff for another season, which also almost didn't come. Do-Da-Da-Da only finally got renewed in 2015, 5 years after its original airing, after much of the team who made it had split off and formed a new studio. In 2016, I went to a panel with the producer who had started this new studio, and she was producing Do-Da-Da-Da Season 2, and I asked her if she had any plans to continue Baccano. And she said that while she would love to do it, there are no plans of that sort. Which is hardly surprising, because Do-Da-Da-Da was much more successful than Baccano, especially in Japan. Probably because it has a more contemporary setting and much prettier boys. Very much a cross-gender hit. So we've got Baccano, this badass action show that adapts a few light novels, disappears, and all I could ever hope for was that maybe these light novels would eventually get licensed and released in the US so that I could continue the story. I really wanted to know what happens to all these wacky, eclectic characters. I want to know where they're going to go from here, what Rail Tracer and Shanae, I think is her name, are going to do after they hook up, which I know because Andrew Cunningham wrote about some of the books on his blog. The guy who I mentioned earlier as the Boogie Pop translator talked about how Rail Tracer and it's Shane Laforet, I think that's her name, how the two of them have kids who then become major characters in later books. Spoilers. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that happens, because Baccano is a story about a bunch of immortals, and while the story takes place in the 1920s, it also has flashbacks to the 1500s when the immortality first began amongst a bunch of characters who are still relevant to the story in 1920. It also continues throughout the 20th century because half the fucking characters are immortal and the other half, they're going to age. So the story in the later novels just starts jumping all over this timeline, going well into the future and stuff like that. So I really wanted to know what was going to happen in these stories. Now, there was a fan translation effort, and I did try to read one of the books, and I had that moment of, I'm not sure if this book is terribly written or if this translation is terribly written, but one of them's the case, so I'm not going to read this. And in retrospect, it's still hard to say, because the Baccano light novels, the first one has come out in the US, and it's not amazing. It's not amazingly written. It's not something that grabs my attention immediately and makes me think, holy shit, I want to read all of these. And that wouldn't be a problem if that book was like $6, maybe even $10. $10, I could deal with that. Because these books in Japan, I think that the way that we think about light novels is fundamentally different because we're not seeing what they originally are, which is something that one guy cranks out fucking constantly. Light novels are usually written like 2 or 3, sometimes 4 books in a year by the same guy who is just kind of flying by the seat of his pants. And I really see light novels as similar to YouTube videos, where they're created quickly. It's all about just getting the idea out there as fast as you can, and then you kind of move on. It's like it's meant to be a easily consumable kind of popcorn entertainment that one person is expected to make something every single week on YouTube, and that's being generous. I make stuff like I'm expected to make shit every fucking day. But it's this sort of very immediate, easy entertainment that's meant to be sold for cheap. It's kind of pulp literature. It's not meant to be something that's returned to for all time, something that you want in a hardcover special edition. And I get it. I get why some people would, because Baccano is a popular anime series, one that a lot of people do cherish and care about, and certainly when you get to the level of an anime, there's just so much more involved. This is a show that had time to take these books and really think about how to adapt them. Whereas the novels are written with the mindset of, all right, I've got an idea for the next one. Boom, it's written. Fucking publish it, and we'll sell it for cheap, sell it for what, $6 probably, the equivalent of that. Because Japanese print media is pretty fucking cheap. Whereas an anime series is something that a director and writer took these books and really thought about how they could make a structurally sound TV show out of them, figure out what are the best, most interesting elements of this book, and what stuff can we cut? What can we do to make this optimized for the visual format? And then we'll get a team of unique and talented animators to put their own spin on these events and really bring it to life. And have a great soundtrack and great voice acting. Oh my god, the voice acting in Baccano is phenomenal. Half of my favorite Japanese voice actors I discovered through Baccano. Tomokazu Sugita, whom everyone knows for Gintoki. Keiji Fujiwara, who I guarantee you've heard somewhere. Ryo Hirohashi. Norio fucking Wakamoto, who for a long time was the best known anime voice actor to Western fans because of his incredibly memorable, booming voice. Just a lot of people I really cared about. I found out about them all through this show. Sort of birthed my fandom of voice actors, of seiyuu, in the first place. All of that is, a huge team putting all their efforts in to make this show great. And I really think that every time a light novel adaptation comes out amazingly, it's a small miracle, because this is the coordinated efforts of a ton of people, and there's so much that can go wrong. There's every stage of production something could have gone wrong, but somehow they took all of it, and these really intelligent people created a great functional story out of this source material, which, again, had been written at the seat of the pants. It was written as fast as possible. cranked out. And yes, these original novels have interesting ideas, but it's really difficult, I think, for a light novel to live up to its anime adaptation unless something went really wrong, which often is the case. But I really can't picture reading The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya after having seen the anime. Ore no Imoto can't possibly be as good as the anime, and I don't even particularly like that one. A Certain Magical Index, etc., etc. Not to say that these are not good light novels, and some of them even do have little nuances that maybe the anime didn't quite capture that might make it worth it to read through those volumes again. But $20 hardcover is just a bit much. And I would love to buy the Baccano novels and eventually be able to read past what the show provided. But when they're selling them exclusively in $20 hardcover form because they know how long people have waited for this, they know that people are going to be so excited about Baccano, this series that they've cared about for 10 fucking years, to finally come out, that they're going to milk us dry. It pisses me off to no end. My entire history with light novels has been a slow descent into disappointment. My involvement with light novels really began in 2005. I talked in a previous episode, obviously, about the Boogie Pop novels, particularly Boogie Pop and Others. I'd also read that Dot Hack novel that I mentioned before, and then a couple of more proper Japanese novels in the form of Vampire Hunter D and Blood the Last Vampire Night of the Beasts, written by Mamoru Oshii. Fucking weird. And I remember those four in particular because I wrote reviews of all four of them right around the time that I first started using the name Digital Boy, which would later be shortened to Digibro, hence the username. And it was because I was so into Boogie Pop that I found out about 7 Seas, the publisher, and how they were trying to push this whole light novel movement, most of which never actually happened. There were a couple that I was really looking forward to, and they just never came out. I remember there was supposed to be one about, I think, a sniper girl, and I really wanted to read it. It looked cool as shit, and they kept pushing back the release date, and then it just never came out. I had wanted to read Shinigami no Ballad, but I could never find it for sale, and then I found it at a library and checked it out and then just never read it at all and took it back because I have always been lazy about actually getting around to things, as you may have noticed. But through that whole thing, I found out about light novels, and then of course finding Andrew Cunningham and his website gave me more and more insight into it. And then it just happened that a lot of my favorite anime in the late 2000s were based on light novels. We had, obviously, Baccano. There was Spice and Wolf, which came from a lot of the same team as Baccano, same studio, Brainspace, back when they were good. That show had a phenomenal soundtrack, great visuals, overall great presentation, really interesting story about economics in a rural society of, I don't know, the 1800s or before, I don't know what time period it's supposed to be. History. Spice and Wolf eventually did get brought over as a light novel by Yen Press. I think that's the first one, and I never quite understood this. Spice and Wolf has a very interesting cult following, because when the anime first aired, it wasn't really that big a deal, but the people who watched it had loved it. And then they made a second season. Once again, the people who watched it loved it. It eventually kept growing in popularity. And the weird part is that both the manga and the light novels started coming out stateside, and neither got canceled. They ran all the way through, which was a large amount of books, and I was always shocked by this, because I had bought Volume 1, and I've still never fucking read it. I've had it for for 7 years. I think I read a chapter of it and never got around to continuing, which was kind of, over time, anytime I get into a stint of buying light novels, the fact that I don't end up reading them eventually cancels it, because I don't want to keep buying new ones when I haven't even read the ones I already had. So there was a long period of time where I stopped buying light novels just because I hadn't read Spice and Wolf yet, and I still haven't. And I would have felt so justified in that if the series had gotten the same treatment that everything else I care about gets, but amazingly, they released the whole goddamn thing. Of course, you can never find every volume in stores. It's always volume 15 or something, or some random shit. But, it actually got released. Getting back to anime adaptations, I've already talked about The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, Kara no Kyokai, which those films came out between 2007 2008, and they were fucking incredible, blew my mind. But that's the funny thing, right? Again, these are all adaptations. And again, the best light novel adaptations will take that source material, weed out all the worst stuff, pump up all the best stuff, and just totally transform it. In the first volume of Faust, the light novel compilations that I've talked about extensively on my After Dark channel, they had the first book of Kara no Kyokai, which was adapted into the first film, Fukan Fuke, or Overlooking View. And it is fucking incomprehensible. It is so badly written. The prose is disgusting. It doesn't help that the translation is confusing, because in the Japanese version, Shiki refers to herself with multiple different gendered pronouns, depending on like what dominant personality is in control or whatever. And in English, they're all just me and I, and it's very confusing to tell like what exactly who's talking at a given time. But man, the whole thing is just like it's stuff that in the movie I totally get, in the novel somehow makes no sense. And I mean, Kinoko Nasu has like said himself that first book is like an abomination. But that film is one of my favorite fucking films of all time. I love Overlooking View because the visuals are so fucking on point in that film. It's so thickly tonal. It has one of my favorite anime soundtracks of all time, one of my favorite Yuki Kajiura soundtracks at that. The character designs are great, the animation's incredible. It's just like a perfect tone piece. And so almost everything that's great about that movie is not present in the original source material. So to me, light novels are kind of like a great springboard because, again, they're just unchecked creativity. It's just some madman who constantly has ideas churning out book after book of his crazy ideas, and then someone else can come later and like modify it and make sense of it all and make it into something presentable. And it's not that the unhinged ideas are bad, they could be entertaining. I mean, if you're someone who watches, let's say, Digibro After Dark, and you enjoy watching me ramble on, and then sometimes those ramblings get converted and actually written and contextualized into a full-blown Digibro main channel video, then you can see the difference when you've had time to think and put things together and really work through it and have an editor take a look at it and have him figure out what's going on, with the visual aspect. And there's a lot of people who still greatly appreciate the After Dark experience. It's just that sometimes a point can be made better and feel more fulfilling and timeless when it's been poured over a little bit more. And I really think that that's what all those great light novel adaptations were doing. I would even include Ore no Imoto in that. That was also a show that, love or hate the storyline, they put a lot of effort into that anime. That was a high-quality anime adaptation, which is more than I can say for the slew of bullshit light novels which would follow in its wake. Because the light novel market fucking blew up, and there became 100,000 million of them, because any artist who did anything would get a publication deal, and if their books were selling, then they could keep going. And then desperate anime companies just looking to cash a quick buck would pick up some light novel property and try to churn out an anime of it as fast as they could. And sometimes that worked. Usually it didn't. It's still happening. I don't know why I'm using past tense terms. But you've heard me talk about all this. You've seen the Asterisk War Sucks, where I really ripped into this whole entire genre. You've heard me talk about Girlish Number and how that show presents how this industry is chewing these people up and spitting out their work. I've gone on about this. Light novel trends can't possibly be this interesting, where I really detailed the whole history of the different stylistic stuff that was going on. I've talked about how light novels are too expensive in a video on After Dark. I guess I've really tread this ground quite thoroughly. But it all, to me, is most exemplified with Baccano. This book series that, yes, is very interesting, and yes, I would love to read all of it just to know what happens to these characters, but I don't actually think I ever would have been invested enough in the story to care that much had it only been a novel, because it was the anime version which took everything and fleshed it out and brought it to life that got me endeared to this story in the first place. And when I read through book 1 and I try to think of it in terms of like, how would I feel about this if I didn't care about Baccano, it's just boring. It's just so ploddingly written because it feels like it wasn't revised. It feels like the author had an idea of where he wanted the story to go, and then he just started writing, and he didn't stop, and then it was over, and then it got published. There's just no control over like what to remove from the story and what should stay. Probably because it would barely even meet the word count requirement if you took out anything. Whatever the word count requirement is for a light novel. I mean, for fuck's sake, I don't like the Katanagatari anime, but they made a watchable show out of a book series that Nisio Isin published one book a month for a year. I haven't read them. Andrew Cunningham, who I bring up once again, had ripped on them, and he was a huge Nisio Isin fan, and he hated those books. He ripped on them pretty hard on his blog, and I am by no means do I think that he was wrong to do so. I don't even like the anime series, but I mean, I imagine it had a hell of a lot more effort put into it. I just feel like we're all getting the wrong experience with light novels. I feel like the experience you're supposed to have with these is that you pick them up for dirt cheap 2 or 3 times a year when they come out. You stack them up in your room, maybe resell them to some fucking used store later because they're just not that worth holding on to. They're long as shit series that are just cranked out. You're supposed to read them until you either are so invested that you have to know how it goes or you outgrow it and you stop giving a fuck. Because ideally you'd be reading a whole ton of these. Like, it wouldn't just be stuff with already popular anime adaptations that's coming out in your country. The only light novels that get brought to the US are ones that are already proven by way of an anime adaptation, meaning that even if the book itself is dog shit, it doesn't matter because people will buy it because the anime was already popular. And there is a gradient of quality between these. Like, I don't think Baccano is all that great as a book. I think maybe it gets better as the novels go on. I looked a little bit at Durarara, and I didn't read much of it. I do own the first book, the first 2 actually. But like what little I read already seemed more engaging than Baccano, so maybe Narita, grew better writing chops as he went along. Log Horizon is entertaining enough. It definitely has just enough different from the anime that I think both are worth interfacing with, even though the anime definitely is a better version. And there's the light novels that have never been adapted that are great, like Boogie Pop. I really wish we had more stuff like Boogie Pop that isn't already tied. I mean, Boogie Pop had an anime that was somewhat popular, but it's not even adapted straight from the book. We had stuff like All You Need Is Kill, which eventually got a live-action adaptation in the form of Edge of Tomorrow, and a manga adaptation by Takeshi Obata, but it's a really cool story. I really enjoyed it, and I don't even know if it would make a good anime, but it's a great little book. Marduk Scramble is pretty entertaining. In the movies, I haven't seen them yet, but they probably cut a lot out because it's like one book is one film. I don't know, maybe it's not that bad. There's a lot of narration in that would have to be cut. Nisio Isin's Zaregoto had 2 volumes that Del Rey published way back. Of course, that had to get canceled along with Del Rey's entire existence. And now finally it's coming out again, and they're making an OVA that's from the first episode, but even that, like, it's, a proven author. I mean, it's better than nothing, but the only example I can think of, like, recently of stuff that has come out that hasn't been already proven is Asura Girl by Otaro Maijo, which I'm shocked actually came out here, and I think that's really cool. I've only read about a 1/4 of it, but it's really interesting so far in a unhinged batshit kind of way. He now is writing The Dragon Dentist, that new OVA, so, he's known for something at this point. And Shield Hero, which was just a really popular manga with kids online, and now the manga and light novel are coming out here. And that's the right kind of proven. Proven in the sense that people actually like the material. Granted, the light novel, I've looked at a little bit of it. insufferable. The manga is pretty good. I enjoy the manga. I think the light novel is god awful because the narration style is just totally fucking insufferable. I just feel like with this Baccano book, I had a very clear sensation of this is too little too late for too much money. Baccano mattered a lot 10 years ago. It was a great show. It should have had a second season, but it didn't. It should have had light novels coming out in the US at the time at a regular, normal price, but it didn't. And now light novels are at minimum $14, which is already too much for something that you read in like 3 hours and then never touch again because it's not that good. And it definitely shouldn't be $20 and hardcover just because you're banking on the nostalgic feelings of fans who have been waiting for all this time for a product that ultimately isn't as good as the thing that we're already a fan of. We're not here to collect Baccano because it's a classic novel series. We're here because we want to know what the fuck happens after the anime, which was sadly cut short and may never get a second season. The thought of the fact that the first 5 books, which were probably all covered by the anime, will run me $100 to reread a worse version of a story I already have an amazing version of is just baffling, especially when you can probably buy the whole Baccano collection for like $50 on Blu-ray. I know I'm getting off into the weeds talking so much about the price of these things, but that really affects me a lot because I read things physically. I really prefer that method. I mean, if I'm just stealing these, then whatever, but it feels wrong to me. It puts me off. It's like, I wouldn't mind reading all of Baccano, just not like this. I don't want it to be this endeavor to read all of it. And it's been 10 years. I'm not as invested as I once was. I don't even think the anime is as good as I thought it was back then. It's well written. It has a great ensemble cast. It has great memorable action scenes and animation. All of that is still true. It just maybe isn't as unique to me as I once thought it was. Maybe just some of the shock value is gone, or I've seen too many other stories about immortal badasses fighting. There's been a lot of other good action shows in the time since, and in a lot of ways, Do-Da-Da-Da has kind of stolen its thunder, because even though I always thought Baccano was a better show than Do-Da-Da-Da, Do-Da-Da-Da had the good fortune of continuing for fucking 70 episodes, or however the hell long it was. And while the later seasons kept getting worse and weirder, nonetheless, I feel like I got the full experience. I feel like I got to follow one of these things all the way to the end for once. I didn't have to wait on a cancellation. I mean, I did have to wait 5 years, but like, I didn't have to, it happened, you know, a whole light novel got adapted. I don't even know if that's ever happened before. I don't know if I can name another light novel series where the entire thing was adapted to anime. I mean, I don't know if that happened. I don't think Ori no Imoto went all the way to the end. There might be some examples with really short light novel series. God, I don't know. I don't think it's ever happened. I mean, most of them haven't ended. Most of them are long as shit. Toradora. Toradora is the only example I could think of where it actually covers the entire story. And Toradora is great. That's another one, I keep forgetting to mention it, but that's another one of my favorite light novels, or favorite anime, which was adapted from a light novel and was from this period, 2008. I guess what I'm getting at here is that light novels are the ultimate example of everything that this series has been dedicated to. Something that I cared about very deeply at one time, and which I wanted to talk about more than anything. I felt like I was the spokesperson for light novels, one of the few people who understood it as a medium, one of the few people who had consumed a lot of it, who had so many of my favorite anime having been adapted from them. It really felt like there was a culture and sensibility behind these books that just agreed with me, regardless of the fact that they were being adapted to anime. They were capturing this feeling, which often involved sort of Lovecraftian horror, as you would see in Boogie Pop and Haruhi and Index, all have these elements of cosmic horror, of smallness, of a sense of nihilism, these stories that were very young adult fiction at a time when I was a young adult, you know, for my generation, with this anime, video game sensibility, this very millennial attitude. Just in general, these were stories that appealed to me on a deep personal level. They were sort of my aesthetic, as people like to say. And to grow up and then not only find that None of the anime adaptations are as impressive as I remember, and now that I finally have access to the source material, those are just not even worth it, and they're all charging ridiculous amounts of money for them. It just feels like the whole thing died in my arms. Like everything that was there that I held dear, and it all just kind of evaporated. And all before I got the chance to talk about it. All before I ever, like, I think back then it was so hard for me to talk about light novels because no one was reading them. And now that people know what they are, there's no good ones left, or they just aren't good. I could talk about them now, but it wouldn't be worth it. Not to say that there's no good ones. Some of them are worth reading. I just can't advocate for paying $14 for them. And even still, they come out on a slow drip. I guess this is what happens when I do revisit this. This is everything I'm afraid of happening with these other shows I've talked about. I'm afraid that I rewatch Manabi Straight or Haruhi or Welcome to the NHK or reread Boogie Pop or the NHK light novel, which I praised highly in that episode. Or I rewatch Baccano, which I still haven't fully rewatched in the last probably 5 years. And I'm terrified of rewatching those and having the same experience I had of reading that first Baccano novel and realizing that it was never worth it. That this thing I built up for all this time, that I had such a portrait of in my mind as this kind of holy thing, was never really worth it. And I'm still clinging to it. I still keep buying light novels, although I've stopped again because I bought a bunch when I noticed the resurgence happening and then didn't read any of them, so I've quit. I want it to be good. I so badly want to justify those years of obsession, only to realize that I'm fighting a losing battle, and it's just not worth buying them. Anyway, that's enough about light novels, hopefully forever. I know I've reiterated all these points way too many times, not only in this podcast, but in the countless times I've talked about light novels. I just really had to, get it all off my chest, and this podcast series is so perfect for this subject that I felt like it would be weird not to include it. So, apologies if you've heard me rant about all this before, but hopefully it was still entertaining enough for you, and focusing specifically on Baccano maybe added something to it. In the next episode, I'm going to be going even further down the nostalgic rabbit hole and talking about some of the earliest anime that I ever got into, because we're going to be covering the old Adult Swim shows. So look forward to that.